We're
Jerry,
off.
Jerry, did you see that chat I sent to you
Oh,
just now, like a minute ago?
um,
That's okay. I just wanted to see if I could have 30 seconds to make an announcement about a film we're
Go
screening
ahead.
this Sunday.
Sure, yeah.
Okay. Oh, you want me to do it now?
Yeah.
Okay. I will do it. I get first crack. And so while I'm at it, just want to welcome everybody to the meeting. Thanks so much for joining us for our Southeast Michigan Group March meeting. My name's Garrett Dempsey. I'm co-chair with Jerry Hasbacker of the Southeast Group. The announcement I did just want to share is that our Detroit Outdoors Youth Camping Collaborative and Outdoors Collaborative is screening a film this Sunday. And I'll put the link to the registration page with info in the chat, but it's called Black Ice. It's a film about a community center called Memphis Rocks in Memphis, Tennessee that has a climbing wall. And it's a great film, about an hour long, of these climbers. You know, they're almost all Black climbers in Memphis, hooking up with some world-class climbers, including Conrad Anker, and going out to I think it is Montana in the middle of winter and trying ice climbing for the first time. And I guess there's a little bit of a connection with our work in that just a few weeks ago, Detroit Outdoors was up at the Michigan Ice Festival in Munising, and we had with us a number of folks from the Sierra Club, including the director of the campaign that I work under called the Our Wild America campaign, Chris Hill. She came in from Haines, Alaska, and she just sort of by good fortune met Conrad Anker while on the ice with the class we're doing, and then the next day spent a whole day climbing ice with these folks from Memphis Rocks and Conrad Anker right here at Pictured Rocks National Lakeshore. So they're our friends, as well as being part of this cool film. So I'll put the link in, and you all are invited to come. It's free for everybody at Dino Climbing Gym this Sunday, 7 p.m.
Sounds good. Okay, I've got one announcement before we introduce our speaker today. Actually, Jane is going to introduce the speaker. But I did get an email today from Mike Busa, who's with the Nepasing group. So we're the SCMG group, and there's another group, and I think this is sort of like northwest of Oakland County. And he said, I'm asking everyone I can think of to write letters to call state legislators and ask them to support solar wind siting reform. The Sierra Club is currently in the later stages of developing a position on the issue. The anti-renewable forces are already contacting their legislators. If you contact them, you will want to tell your legislator let your legislator know that you are concerned with the number of townships that have ordinances that effectively zone out solar and wind developments. Then use the attached talking points to bolster your letter. So those attached talking points are at the bottom of the chat. And if you want to take a look at them, I can also drop in Mike Busa's email in a couple minutes, and you can contact your legislator about that particular issue. So without further ado, Jane O'Neill is going to introduce Ben Luce. Jane?
Thanks, Jerry. So Ben Luce is with us tonight. Ben is a physicist and a longtime renewable energy advocate. Presently, he's serving as chair of the American Solar Energy Society. You can look that up at ases.org. That's a recent addition to his CV. He's also a lifetime member and past president of the New Mexico Solar Energy Association, and is a co-founder and former director, of the New Mexico Coalition for Clean Affordable Energy. Ben, I'm going to add a little bit to the written description here because I know Ben really well. Ben was with the Los Alamos National Lab for 15 years, many years, and working on renewable energy there. So in New Mexico, and got very, very involved in a wide variety of activities to help get renewables into our energy resource repertoire. Since 2008, he's chaired the Sustainability Studies program at Northern Vermont University, where he teaches physics, renewable energy, and other courses. And just recently, he's shortly before becoming chair of ASES, he founded Renewable Energy Now. And I can drop the link to both of those organizations in the chat. That'll be easier than reading this out, as a new vehicle for providing education and advocacy services for the clean energy transition to a wider audience. It's my great pleasure tonight to introduce to you Dr. Ben Luce.
Thank you, Jane. It's an honor to be here and nice to meet many of you. I've worked in coalition with the New Mexico chapter of the Sierra Club a lot in the past. They were actually a major player. And that coalition idea is one that I'll stress here. So what I'm going to do is go through a little PowerPoint, and it's broken into basically 4 sections. The first part is kind of some overall stuff, some points I want to make. Those slides are mostly sort of bulleted slides, writing slides. Then I've got a whole slew of photographs, fun photographs that that illustrate various points that I've made earlier, and I'll reinforce and add to. And the first part of that will be on educational techniques. The next part will be on policy, and that will have the same format. I'll have some bulleted verbal slides, and then or text slides, and then I'll get into the photographs. One thing just to warn you about, I'm having a little bit of my voice is tired. I've taught 5 classes today, and it's at the end of a long day. And I recently had a pretty serious bout with COVID. So, but I'm doing all right, and I'll do the best I can to get through this. So I'm going to I'll start the PowerPoint here. It may take me a second to get it to look properly displayed. Okay, how does that look? Are you seeing that okay? And can you hear me okay?
Looks good, sounds good on our end.
Okay.
For me.
If I move the mouse around, can you see it? Can you see the pointer on the mouse? Okay.
I can see the pointer, yeah.
Okay, all right, so fantastic. All right, so anyways, so ACES has become recently, as Jane was mentioning, the main group that I'm working with. My Renewable Energy Now group, I was just getting that off the ground as a local group up here in this area of Vermont that I live in. But I'm so busy with ACES and teaching right now that I'm not sure how much of my new group is really going to continue. I am working on founding a new local chapter of ACES up in this area, and that may sort of morph with that. So you might notice some of the Renewable Energy Now stuff is a few months out of date and becoming more out of date. I wanted to say a little bit about ACES. ACES actually was founded all the way back in 1954, and it is pretty much the primary solar energy advocacy group, nonprofit advocacy group in the United States. We are not an industries association, but we have a lot of membership in industry, in the national labs, and we've got chapters all over the country, and enthusiast groups, advocacy groups, and a lot of people that work in conjunction with groups like yours. So we're kind of a hub. I like to think of ACES as kind of a network. These are some of the things that ACES does. One of the most important things I think it does is a national solar tour. This has gone on for decades. It's turned a lot of people onto solar and helped with a lot of homeowners getting into the area. There is a tight connection between ACES and the national labs, especially NREL, the National Renewable Energy Lab. So there's a lot of linkage there for getting information out to the general public. On the research side, there's also a lot of links at the national conference between industry and advocacy groups. There's a magazine, Solar Today magazine, which is very good and has a wide variety of interesting articles and informative articles on the topic. And then, as I mentioned, there's many chapters around the country. The chapters, each chapter is a standalone organization, and many of these chapters are extremely active and very large and vibrant organizations unto themselves, and each one has to have its own character. The one that I'm going to you're going to see a lot of photographs of is the work I did with the New Mexico Solar Energy Association, which was actually the first state chapter. It goes back a long ways and has a really great tradition of its own. But just to let you know, if you explore the ACES website, you can find links to the local chapters. And I haven't investigated in detail what's going on right where you guys are, but there are Midwest chapters that are active in roughly your part of the country. And then there's a lot of education programs. We put on webinars and various things to educate. We're doing a lot of stuff right now on the Inflation Reduction Act. We're doing a lot of stuff on policy and barriers and things like that. So some basic points here. I got into this myself because I was concerned about climate change. I got very concerned about this in the early 1990s and decided to get involved. And my bent from the beginning has been to actually focus on actually fixing the energy supply, which I think is the best thing we can do. We can protest for action on climate change, but it's hard to get that to work unless there's really an alternative that people could switch to. And it's just a fact, I think, or a fairly confident fact, or I should say opinion maybe, that the world is not going to be turning down its energy usage dramatically, and we're not going to stop using fossil fuels unless we have a very good alternative. So from my point of view, this is just something we must transition to renewable energy. And as I'm going to say in a second, it has to be a great deal of that to really make it work. So this question often arises, is a 100% transition to renewable energy, which is what ACES's vision is it really technically possible? And the short answer to that is absolutely. But something that has really emerged from the research community recently is that the realization that in order to really make this work economically, we actually have to overbuild the renewable energy quite a bit. Energy storage is costly, and even though it's coming down in cost, will probably remain at a fairly high cost. And coupled with that, if you look at photovoltaics, for example, we do get cloudy periods, but there's very rarely a cloudy period that we get effectively no sun. Even on a cloudy week, there is usually some solar energy. And when people do careful modeling of the energy grid and really put things together, the best research out there, what it shows is if we just build photovoltaics, for example, if we just build it to meet the energy demand just on a kilowatt hours basis or a megawatt hours basis, the amount of storage required to get through the intermittent periods is enormous and doesn't really it isn't really cost effective. But if we overbuild solar, even a slight overbuild, which what this sort of green area here represents, the cost, the levelized cost of energy comes down very, very quickly. And for a fairly reasonable overbuild, and the amount of overbuild depends on the location and load characteristics and other things, but a fair amount or a fairly reasonable amount of overbuild brings the cost down a great deal and can take us to basically 100% renewables grid with quite reasonable. But this really what this shows is that we're nowhere near the level yet that we need to be, even in areas that have a fairly high renewable energy penetration. We need to get to very high levels. Now, another question is is this practical? When I first got into this business back in the 90s, solar was a hard sell. You were considered kind of a bozo if you were out there promoting solar energy. A lot of people just didn't think it was practical. and renewables in general. That's changed a lot. We are seeing enormous amounts of renewable energy going in now, and it is really seriously challenging fossil fuels. Even in places where you wouldn't expect it, a lot of red states in the United States, politically red, Australia, a very big coal country, it is really getting somewhere. So it's really quite credible now to say that to even argue that a transition to renewables is likely, but it's not guaranteed. It may not get there in a timely way. And there's also, I think, our success is kind of undermining us in some sense. There's a lot of people out there that sort of feel like renewables are kind of done, but that we've already gotten them off the ground and we just need to let them keep rolling. And that actually can undermine the pressure to keep doing more. The other thing is renewables are not the only proposed solution out there. There's a lot of support for a nuclear power renaissance. We've got rumbles of fusion coming out the door now, getting to, and there's this idea of carbon sequestration, which is to pump a lot of carbon down into primarily large underground aquifers and dissolve it and create basically giant underwater soda balls. I don't think the nuclear and carbon sequestration routes are desirable, sustainable, for lots and lots of reasons. I could talk to you for 2 hours about that. I'm not going to, but if we don't want to go that route, if you're personally not in favor of those routes, then it's really the renewables route that you need to be looking at. Now, a major point I want to make tonight to you guys is how should this transition be made? Because we are now in the process of doing this transition. And there is a lot of choice as to how it's done. One of the things we have in our vision statement, we just in fact revised our vision statement. Our vision statement now basically reads an equitable and sustainable 100% transition to renewable energy. The sustainable part is important. It is a tendency of people who promote renewables to take a kind of any renewable project is good, and any kind of speaking against a given project is bad. A kind of an absolutist or purist sort of point of view. Unfortunately, though, there can be a lot of abuse in renewable energy. We've just seen Greta Thunberg, for example, protesting a wind farm in Europe. I think that's arguably a wind farm that shouldn't go in because of its environmentally sensitive area. The basic physical fact, and I say this now with my physicist hat on, renewable resource, the fundamental physical renewable energy resources are incredibly large. Just the amount of solar energy hitting the planet continuously is 173,000 terawatts. Our entire civilization uses, a little over a terawatt. So we're sitting, our civilization has as much energy as we feel like we're using, and as many problems as the impacts of fossil fuel extraction and climate change cause. The amount of energy we are actually using is minuscule compared to what is just simply around us in the environment. So we have a lot of flexibility in where we put this stuff and how we do it. That is intrinsic to this, and we should take advantage of that flexibility. So we need to do this right. We really, really need to be pushing and making this as sustainable as possible. And if we don't, we really risk an even greater pushback from the general public, and we risk handing the opposition a very powerful sword to cut off progress. Equitability is also important. We are talking about massive shifts in economics and lots of money. There can be very big differences in price tags for different types of development. There can be a lot of differences in who is doing the work and getting paid for it, and who's getting paid to manufacture, to install, to maintain. There is enormous potential for positive social benefit, shielding low-income populations from high energy prices and price spikes, creating economic development in low-income areas and for people that are economically disadvantaged. So there's a potential for great impact from that. But if it's done wrong, it can have the opposite impact, and that can also hand the opposition a lot of ammunition to use to shoot this down. This has happened before. In the 1980s, there was a big, in late 70s, there was a big growth of solar thermal installations. And that was due to very, very generous federal tax credits for solar thermal. Effectively, it was essentially being given away. And there was a lot of abuse. There was a huge number of systems that were very badly designed and very badly installed. And that was used quite effectively by the opposition to come up with a fairly credible excuse that there was a problem with this and that the tax credits should be rolled back. But we shouldn't have rolled back the tax credits. What we should have done was put some quality requirements on and some regulation on how it was being done. But that's not what happened. In the end, the opponents won that, and they set us back 30 or 40 years by kneecapping that early nascent renewable energy movement. We also need this in as widely as possible. We are seeing a lot of pushback against renewable energy development in certain states. So we're at risk of having a situation where we make a lot of progress in many US states, but then end up making very little progress in some. And the same thing applies to the rest of the world. And so there's a lot that we need to do to keep this going. We need incentives to overcome economic barriers. We need to remove barriers in general to interconnection, to getting this into the energy mix. We need a great deal of education for the public to be on board with this and to take advantage of whatever we can field. And we need this to take a lot of different forms. We need photovoltaics. We also need wind power, especially in certain places. We need electric vehicles to replace transportation or to reduce emissions in the transportation sector. Heat pumps are a very good way to reduce fossil fuel heating emissions, and things like passive solar and other sustainability measures. There's a lot that we can be doing, and we need to look at the whole package. So advocates of renewable energy really need to do more than just promote the transition. So the transition still needs to be promoted. So that's still number one in my mind. But we also need to guide it, and guiding it may mean making hard decisions. It may mean taking a very careful look at different projects and different types of development and coming out against some of them. Now there's no easy answer to that. Who decides what's a good project, what's not a good project? That is something that is very, very difficult, and there's going to be lots of differences of opinion. My short answer to that is each person who's involved with this at an advocacy role needs to learn as much as they can, and to try to take the best faith and best informed position they can. And people need to remain flexible. You may need to change your mind. You may decide that some particular project is good, and then later on find that maybe not, and vice versa. So information, flexibility, and you got to be courageous. You may end up taking a politically unpopular position on something, but that's what that can be sometimes exactly what's needed to fix a problem. We also need to enable the transition, and this is where policy work comes in. I'll talk more about that later, but actually 2 and 3 are, well, all 3 are actually very tied up with policy. And all 3 of these things are really tightly interrelated and interdependent. I think it's effectively, you can't really do a good job at any of these in isolation. They need to be done sort of all at once. So this breakdown is a little bit artificial, but we really need that broad approach. And finally, the main two things are policy advocacy and education. And these are really quite distinct things in terms of implementation. So I call these out quite distinctly, and they're both essential. Any questions up to this point? Any comments? I'm a teacher, so I like to see what my students, if I can call you that without offending anyone, like to, or what they think, or okay.
Hey, Ben, this is Garrett.
Yeah.
When you talk about like storage and versus like I don't know if you said versus, but like there's storage and there's also like just capacity and build out. I've heard, and I can't remember, like you made me think of what I've heard about Hawaii, and I believe I heard Hawaii's at this place where they've got a lot of one, but they don't have a lot of the other. And I wonder, is that a unique case, or is it something that's instructive to sort of like places like the Midwest or other localities?
Yeah, I would say most places right now, if they have much of either, tend to be short on storage right now, because storage is newer and has come down the cost curve less. But both are essential. And what's really becoming clear from the research is that you don't need just both, but you need to be really looking at how they're integrated. And the overbuild side is really interesting, because now that we finally have some real storage options, that is teaching us that what we also need on the capacity side, and that it goes hand in hand. We're trying to create one integrated, just reliable energy system, and they're just two sides of the same coin. Okay, let me go on. Oh, Dave.
Yeah. I guess the one about solar panels are toxic, it kind of hits me a little, like I kind of see that point, because you get all these, at least for electrical vehicles where I know the example better, the lithium usually comes from places where you have to mine where there's radioactive materials, and it's really hard, and it's like, so I hear too much panacea, like, oh, renewables will save us, and then they forget telling us about all the costs of mining, and sometimes it gets really difficult to have debates, because some people get in orthodoxies, and it's very hard.
Yeah, this is a major topic, and it's going to become more acute as time goes on. This speaks to several things. We need to be honest about these things and taking an honest look at them and addressing them honestly. Now, my basic point on this is that I believe we must go in this direction. But even with storage, there is potentially a lot of options and flexibility, both in terms of the materials potentially being used and how they're mined and where they're mined. We are seeing, for example, with lithium, the known deposits of extractable lithium, that list seems to be growing sharply. And there may be some very judicious choices about some areas to leave alone and some areas where it can be extracted and how it's extracted. So that's the thing. This really comes back to the idea of trying to guide the transition and really looking at that. We are a very high impact civilization, and I don't think we're going to stop using energy. There's going to be significant impacts. We are not going to be able to get totally away from that. We have to work at trying to minimize them, and we have to try to do that in an equitable and sustainable way. And it's a challenge. It's a major challenge. So when I put this one up, I put this one up specifically because there's a lot of people that actually have a misconception about solar. There are one or two types of solar panels that have heavy metals in them. There's cadmium tellurium, for example. And personally, I do have some concerns about that particular technology, especially if you had a situation where those solar panels were being actually vaporized if you had fires and releases of that cadmium into the environment, where it could get out of the chemical matrix. However, the typical solar panel that we're still using today is made out of silicon and germanium with trace amounts of germanium and boron, and that stuff is not toxic. And we are now seeing very, very good recycling processes being developed, which can actually, if we just implement them, even for very old panels, fully recycle the stuff. So there's a lot of misconceptions out there as well as legitimate issues with this, and these things are each question here requires a discussion and data and facts and analysis, and we have to be honest about the legitimate criticisms. Okay, so let me keep going now at this point. So one of the key things I have, this is another major point of this presentation to you guys. It's hard to convince people sometimes to support this stuff. But one of the things that I found over many years that I think is really helpful is putting the real stuff in front of people. Not just, well, there are a lot of groups will put out pieces of paper or a display or something like that. That's not totally useless, but if you actually put this stuff in front of people like this, I don't go anywhere if I can help it without this. It's an actual PV panel, and it's wonderful. You can see the crystals in it. You can explain to people how it works, and having something tangible. Human beings remember stuff and tend to be more interested in stuff that they can touch. It's just a basic thing about human beings. Also, it can be fun to interact with things, and people can learn a lot more by really, they can get a much more intuitive feel for things and get more excited about them when they can really interact with them. So that's one of the major themes when I show you some photographs in a moment, that's really a major thing for me. And I really pursued this for over a decade in New Mexico, and I learned a lot about that. I still do this here. Also, giving the public truly useful information. I can write down for you a few things about passive solar design, which utterly clarify, for example, how to do that, which you can hardly find out there. There's many examples like that. There's often a disconnect between what groups put out and what the general public actually needs. This is something we're constantly struggling with in ACES, and we're actually fielding a whole bunch of new initiatives to improve the stuff we've got, for example, because it's not really up to par, I think. And so this is a struggle. It's difficult to do this, but it requires a lot of thought. I've already spoken on the last points. Another thing to keep in mind here too, there is a lot of gloom and doom around climate change for very good reason. And people can feel very disempowered and not engaged. But I just want to say to you folks, being really involved with this stuff, being really involved with the equipment, doing events out and interacting with the general public. If you do this kind of work, you really will find a very strong community. I've always found this. The people that tend to get involved with us in a very active way, they tend to be great people. They tend to be enthusiastic and fun to be with, and you can learn a lot from them. They tend to be knowledgeable. Really do something satisfying. You can learn a lot. You can watch your work bear fruit. And for those of you who might have kids, it can be a very kid-friendly thing. It can be a lot of fun to bring your kids into this kind of work. You don't want to bring your kids to the state legislature, probably, right? But if you're setting up solar water pumps and solar ovens and making cookies for people and things like that, well, that's something that a lot of kids can kind of get into. Jane.
This might be a good time to mention, I looked up who the Michigan chapter of ASCS is, and it's our good friend John Freeman at the Great Lakes Renewable Energy Association, who I just had come speak a month or so ago. So the two birds with one stone. Ed McCardle makes point that one argument new people give about solar against solar is that the panels only last 10 or 20 years. But he asks, aren't the panels that Reagan took down still working on a school somewhere?
Yeah, now there's a distinction between solar hot water or solar thermal panels and photovoltaic panels. But the fact is both technologies can last a very long time, many decades, if they're built right. Well, man, we in New Mexico, we were using in the around 2007, for example, we were still using solar hot water panels manufactured by Grumman around 1982. And they were running fine. So solar thermal can last a long time. Photovoltaics can last a very long time if they're made right. They are basically a crystalline technology, which is effectively geologically stable material potentially. If the laminates are made right, and whatnot, many of these panels will probably produce for 50 years if they're made right. Now they will gradually lose a little bit of their output over time. That's true, but they're also recyclable. So yeah, so that's a common red herring, and that, by the way, part of that belief among some people, it was based on real experience. In the late 90s, for example, we had some thin film solar get sold to lots of people, and that stuff burned out within 5 years. And that goes back to guidance again. We need to make sure that we don't put out incentives that support inferior products or inferior work. That's a key part. Okay, I'm almost ready to get to the photos here. So here's another major thing I learned when I was doing a lot of this stuff out on the street. Oh, by the way, it says boot right here. That should be booth. Although effectively, if you're sitting back in your chair, it's going to be the same thing. So, so there's a tendency of advocacy groups, especially environmental groups, to go to events and set up a table and have your brochures out, maybe a little display, and to sit behind your desk and watch people go by and hope that they come up to your desk. I've seen this 100 times, and it's not effective. What you need to do, if you're going to get this stuff out there, is you need to really get people to engage. And engagement is hard work and takes a lot of thought. But here's a couple of hints. If you field exhibits that are irresistible, that people cannot walk by without coming over and getting involved with, that can be very powerful. And I don't mean just putting out bowls of Milky Way bars. Although that can help too. Providing readable signs. I'm going to show you my park sign concept in some of these pictures. People aren't going to come over necessarily and pick up a complicated piece of literature and read it on the street. But if they can walk by and read an easy sign with clear text in big letters with something in front of an exhibit, they often do so. Literature needs to be useful, actually useful, and physically accessible. Many groups are about getting their message out, but that doesn't necessarily mean the information that is being put out is useful to the people in terms of their energy transition. And it needs to be physically accessible. I'll talk about that. Keeping people involved. We put all this work, we get people to come by our booth. Oh, if you can, you should get their name and email address and then get back to them and keep them in the loop. Take the efforts you do and leverage them in the future. And then creating forums for real learning and discussion. When I give an energy talk, especially to a local community, especially if it's about a pressing issue, my introductory talk will usually go an hour, and then we'll often have a discussion that goes an hour or 2 hours back and forth, where people can really share their preconceptions and talk things out. And I find most of the time that's where people do most of their learning. You often need a talk at the beginning to get basic facts out and set some perspective, and to maybe even get people to think about questions, but you really need to make time for the discussion. So a lot of groups do short webinars, but webinar, 20-minute webinar, it's not going to be enough to really have that happen. So I encourage people, look at putting on big events, long-term events where people get together and they really talk things out for a long time. All right, so here's some of the stuff from my past. This is when I was living in New Mexico. Most of these pictures are not all, but most of these pictures are pre-2008 when I was still out there. So here I am, I'm wearing my New Mexico Solar t-shirt. You can see we've got a couple of our booths here. This is my own personal one. This is a solar system I would actually power my house with, or my apartment actually, technically. I actually run the wires in through the windows. Got it set up here. So this is a real system, and it had batteries. I could really talk to people about what this thing did, what it could do. Here I have a toaster oven, which is a very effective way to show that the system could produce about 1200 watts at least to really do something. TV and a VCR, that really dates it. And a watt meter. And this is just one of many, many things that we would put out there. One of our larger trailers and stuff is in the back. You'll see more of that later. But this was a good unit, and I had a van. I could haul that around full of exhibits. I could store this easily in the driveway. It worked very well, and it functioned on the road for another 5 or 6 years after I left New Mexico. Here's let's see, is that the next? Yeah. Here is me. I'm at an event, one of our solar fairs. Same rig here. You can see this is a passive solar model, which I made out of foam core and a little efficiency thing. And the idea here was to draw people in and get them to actually interact and literally get down on at their level and really engage with them. There's a close-up of this unit. This is back before LEDs were widely available, but this is still a good little kind of display one can make. This, of course, light bulbs, pretty much were over to LEDs, so this isn't as important as it was. But off-the-shelf stuff, simple, clean, interactive. This is the passive solar model. I actually built 10 of these for our schools program. We always supplied these with a globe and a sun so that we could move these around and show people the principles by actually lifting things up and moving them around. We would field quite a team at these events. This is one of our typical groups. This is at an Earth Day festival event at the La Montanita Co-op in New Mexico. This is just a group of our members who do all sorts of stuff. This is one of our PV systems here. You can see the empty tray of solar cookies there. And to the right, our literature rack. I want to say something about this literature rack. It's tilted up where people can see it. It's transparent. It's got a bunch of different stuff. The topics are labeled, and it's windproof. It's very important to be windproof. And there's a canopy up here in case we get rain. We thought a lot about this kind of thing. Here, see the bungee cords here holding this table down. Having the right infrastructure really makes a difference. We had a larger solar trailer. Here's that Grumman panel I mentioned from the early 80s. This is a solar trailer. It had a built-in solar hot water system, a PV system. And here's some of the signage that goes with it. We didn't put these things out there without signage. Simple, easy to read stuff. It's up off the ground. It's tilted at an angle. The viewing angle is easy to look down at. The text isn't too dense. There's photos with it. There's labels. People can walk up to this stuff and quickly get a read. And when you make it this easy for people, they will engage. This is the same trailer here. You can see a larger view. This is at a solar music festival that we held every year for 9 years. Large event, thousands and thousands of people would come to hear the music. Music is a great way to draw people in. Something I'm doing now in another way. This is me over here. I'm demoing a solar hydrogen exhibit. We were talking about hydrogen even back then, and behind there is a scientific thing about hydrogen. Over here to the left, this is a large solar fountain. You can see the water coming out here. People can stand in front of the panel and block it and cause the pump to go on and off. And it's big. It's big. It's really fun and dramatic to interact with this. Kids love to play in the water. People also like to water their dogs at it. And by the way, you notice where I put this. I didn't put this by the main tent over here up against off to the side. I put it out in the middle where people would wander over to it, and then I could talk to them about it. And I would just stand there all day long talking to people. This is a close-up of that. This is one of our volunteers. He's moving back and forth, watching for people to talk to, answer questions. Really having enough people there to stay on top of it. Here's that hydrogen exhibit from the front. Other stuff, providing things that people can connect with the organization with. T-shirts. T-shirts with a cool logo on them. And friendly, engaging people to sell them the T-shirt. Basic, but still a good tactic. Oh, by the way, I don't know if you can see it up here. We had some artists involved with us that were associated with the Pueblos, and that they did fantastically beautiful art. And we still see these T-shirts around today. This is at a Earth Day event down in Alamogordo. I couldn't bring the large solar trailer. There was a problem with the trailer that day, or that morning when I tried to get down there. So I brought one of our car kit exhibits, set up on the sidewalk here. This is a case where I had to be off the sidewalk a little bit, but I'd have to walk out in front of people to get them to come over. There's a setup in Santa Fe. We've got both sides of the walkway here. This is one of our volunteers overseeing the solar cookies. Very popular thing. People would sit there and munch on the cookies and look at the ovens, and then Amy would gently introduce them to everything that she could possibly introduce them to. You can see the other exhibits in the background. Here's our booth again with the literature rack. You can see the sign-up sheet right there, getting people to sign up. You could not get away from this booth without being asked to sign up. We eventually decided to get out into the schools more, and so we constructed 10 kits that could be hauled around in cars. This is the first one that I put together. The PV exhibit here, it's a real system. It's got a real photovoltaic panel, a battery, a charge controller here, a charge meter here, and then excuse me, actual light bulbs that light up. But also pieces of coal, dinosaurs, fossils, little toy solar cars, other things like that, things that can be used to explain concepts. We found a lot of people, especially younger people, didn't understand why we were showing this kind of stuff to them unless we told them about the fossil fuel side too, and really explained to them what it was we were doing. This is a picture of one of the later kits, one of the better kits, being used at a school. We had a number of people that would go around and make presentations. And I'll tell you, the teachers loved this. It was effectively a day off for them. Worked really well. Jane.
So in the last slide, you could see the little house better. Is that house designed to maximize solar panel efficiency?
Yeah. Yes, this is a particular kind of solar designed house. So it has it's long this way, relatively short this way. Most of the windows are on the south facing side. There are overhangs here, which are calculated a certain amount. See, this is in summer. Notice the window is shaded, which you want. And this is a clear story, so-called window, which gets light into the back of the house. There's a lot of basic guidelines about how big to make these windows, where to put the thermal mass. how to even organize the house. So passive solar is its whole own little art form. Also, over the years, I do a lot of stuff at other environmental fairs and things like that, places where I can't bring the big stuff. But I'll at least try to bring smaller things that I can get in there. So I've got a PV panel back here. I've got an evacuated solar thermal tube. I've got a little engaging demo here that the kids can play with that shows how changing the magnetic flux through a coil generates electricity. Some solar science stuff for the more sophisticated student types, and the solar cell here under a light that I could turn on the light and generate a little power from, keeping it as interesting as possible. This is at our Solar Fest, really working the crowd. We would find opportunities to get up in front of people and talk, and we would take our equipment right up on stage with us. Solar ovens. We had an enormous solar oven called the Villager, huge thing. We'd haul around, very impressive, and you could show up at an event, cook food for hundreds of people. Smaller ovens like this, parabolic ovens. These were really eye-catching. They really draw people in. Here's a smaller solar. Here's that one kit at a Native American school in Santa Fe being used. Here's at another event. People having a good time. Gradually getting more into electric transportation. EVs weren't a big thing when I was still in New Mexico, but I did make some attempt. I have this electric bicycle. This is one of my smaller solar rigs, and I would charge this I charged the bicycle with this. For 2 years, I did most of my transportation back and forth to work on this. And for advocacy work, I would ride this across town and hop on a bus and ride around Santa Fe because I lived in Los Alamos. The bike was very effective for engaging people because it's cool. They like it. And if they're brave enough to ride it, it was an amazing experience. And it was all solar powered. On the solar transportation side too, we had a fellow named Monty Ogdahl, now deceased, wonderful guy who built a whole variety of radio controlled solar cars. Like the largest type was up here on the table, but he built a lot of small ones too, and like this, and then built things that kids could play with these with, and they were very popular. It really turned a lot of young people onto the technology, and still a really fun thing to do today. Workshops, taking advantage of projects to get people out and interact with real systems going in and learn about it. This is a system that we put in at the Northwood Stewardship Center in Vermont. This system is a favorite of mine because you can tilt it vertically in the winter. And so it's very good for shedding snow. It's accessible, people can get up close to it. It's made with, the frame is made with local materials and utilizes local craftsmen. So it's good for from an economic community perspective. This was a win-win project from an educational standpoint and from a generation standpoint. I got to interact with Bernie Sanders. I'm throwing into this in more for fun, but Bernie helped us get a grant at my university to put in a system, and I actually showed up in the classroom a few times and talked to my students, which was a fantastic learning experience for them on several levels. And we got the money and we put in a system, and I had the students actually construct it. I had a little bit of a hard time getting them to keep their helmets on. But they did it, and a couple of these people are in the industry now, especially this guy, Ryan. And Bernie came back and helped cut the ribbon with us. So great experience. And this really helped us publicize what we were doing too, having Bernie there, for example. And that helped spread the message, set an example for people. All right, so that's it on the education side. I'm going to switch over to advocacy in a minute. Any last questions on the education side or comments? Comments are fine too. Okay, hearing none.
Ken Skolnick here at a gym watching your program. And I think it's wonderful what you're doing. I'm thinking about how I can use my tiny little trailer enclosed and maybe mount solar panels that tilt on it or tilt up and batteries inside and come help southeastern Michigan.
Yeah, that's exactly the kind of thing. It's a lot of fun. And you do that, you'll have some solar power on your trailer, which can be good for your vacation. All right, so advocacy. So after I got involved with this, I was living in New Mexico, which is dominated by the fossil fuel industry. And at the time, and as is the case in some states today, we didn't have any solar incentives at all. And I began to realize that we weren't going to get anywhere. We could turn the public on all that we wanted to, but without a way to overcome the economic barrier and without a way to break down the grid barrier, we weren't going to get anywhere. So we got involved in policy advocacy, and me in particular, I started showing up at the state legislature, and for the next 10 years, I spent almost all my spare time outside of work and NMCA doing policy advocacy, and really got deeply into it. So what I'm going to present is a little bit of what I think of as a primer on how this really needs to be done. And the first thing and the most important principle of this is that you need a team of people that are full-time. You have to have a really engaged group. It is very hard to do this without that, because what you're up against is a much better organized opposition than you could ever imagine. Utilities can often support many lawyers working on policy all at once, and lobbyists, and they have money for ads, and they have all this political influence through money and donations and things like that. They're very tough to fight. However, your team doesn't have to be huge. This is a David and Goliath kind of situation. And if you've got the right sling and you've got the right David, which is meaning this team, you can actually do a lot. And the amount of money required to do this right is not that bad. It's surprising what you can do, because you have some major things on your side. You've got truth on your side, and you have the momentum now of the renewable energy industry, and you have concern about global warming. And so it doesn't necessarily require all that much, but you've got to have that team in place if you're going to really do this effectively. Now, one way to get that team in place is to work in coalition, and that's exactly what we did. That way you get lots of people, and you get a diverse group of people, and you can pool your resources and your talents. So I think that's really essential. And there are difficulties about working on coalitions, but it is a great way to make this work. So as far as that team goes, the different roles, you need advocates and lobbyists. There's a difference between these two. Advocates are people that are out there arguing for the cause. These are the subject experts. These are the passionate people that get out there and make the big speech and even go into the legislator's office and really urge them to do the right thing, and et cetera, et cetera. A lobbyist is someone who is a technical expert at getting legislation through. They are an expert at building relationships with legislators. Their job is to know all the legislators personally, know their kids' first names. They know the mechanics of the statehouse. They know who is holding which bill hostage. They get to have the intimate conversations, and they're the ones who can go in and work out the roadblocks. And so you go in first and make your case, and then they follow up and help finesse the relationships. Very important to have both. Assistant advocates, not everyone can be the primary advocate, but you can get a lot of headway with assistants, with interns, young people just out of college or in college who can go help. They're a lot cheaper, they're enthusiastic, they're open-minded, they're quick learners, and they often have a lot of free time, they're not tied down. So they can help fill out your team and they can do it cheaply. And the job of the team in a state legislature is to have someone in every committee hearing, at least every committee hearing that's hearing your bill or the bills you're following. You need to have people in there testifying, following. Our teams would be tightly integrated. We would use cell phones, text messages constantly to keep track of what was going on a minute-to-minute basis. Catching people in the hallway as they left the room. Somebody would text me and say, oh, Senator Graham is coming out of his office. Now's your chance. And I'd run out of the committee hearing and down the hall, 3 floors down, and grab the guy just before he walked into the bathroom and say, here's our talking points. Can I talk to you when you get out of the room? You know, that's what you have to do. And you have to talk to everybody. You really have to know what, you have to know what everybody is planning on doing, or you have to try at least. But there's a lot more mechanics to that. Bill drafting, that's a very challenging thing. You need policy experts, and you need at least one lawyer. You're going to need, whoops, this is supposed to say guidance here. You're going to need legal representation at times, and you're going to need a lawyer's advice. And you're going to need expert testimony. Sometimes you're going to have to pay dearly for that. Cost estimates, things like that. Somebody to go before the committee who can testify on something that you don't have the credibility to testify on. Outreach coordinators. So you need more than just people in the State House. You need the public. You need to mobilize the public. So you need people that reach out and that specialize in locating people in the public that can come in and speak and write letters and bring crowds in and stuff like that. That's a particular job that's different from the others. And then there's governance, maintaining that effort, writing grant applications to get support, administering the grants, taking minutes at meetings, bookkeeping, all that kind of stuff. That's what it takes. And believe me, that's what the other side has. Now, the process, you have to identify appropriate policy mechanisms. This is a big thing. There's a lot of policy innovation going on out there. Wonderful ideas, actually, that are making traction in very difficult states. You may need to look around widely to find those. And that's something we can help you with to some extent, but that's a whole task. Drafting the proposals. And also, I should have put here, negotiating the proposals. You have to really often negotiate every single line with your opposition and to get other people on board. Very difficult. You have to often amend things many, many times. You have to arrange for the bill introduction. Just getting the right legislator to introduce the bill and to do so early in the session. Critical. Oftentimes you need to work with a committee ahead of the legislative session to get a committee to introduce it. Crucial. Then you've got to walk the bill through. Again, every single committee, every little step. You need to bring public pressure. There's often a critical moment in the life of a bill, a make or break moment, when if you can field a couple of hundred calls to those legislators in that committee, that may be the difference between the bill making it through and out of committee or not, or past a floor vote or whatever it might be. And you're going to fail. It took us 8 years to get the renewable energy standard through. It took a similar time for the solar tax credit. It is hard, frustrating work. It's amazing. It's amazingly difficult to sit in the gallery and watch the bill for the 7th time go down that you've worked all those years on, and it goes down by 1 vote. And you have to come back and start from scratch the next year. But that's it. No other way. And then even if you get the bill through, that's just the beginning. You've got to guide its implementation. You've got a watchdog. What happens to it? It might get repealed the next year. or it might get twisted around in the regulatory process and ruined and become ineffective. All right, so now how to build that coalition? Well, there's a lot of pros and cons of coalitions. Coalitions are difficult. The benefits are they spread the cost, you get a broad array of expertise and interest, and you get political flexibility. When you're talking to legislators, not every person is the right messenger for a given legislator. People coming from different groups are often more effective. You can strategize. Jane.
I just, the last couple slides, those are pretty daunting. This, we're a group of volunteers, people who are interested. I'm reminded of the people we have at the Sierra Club who are employees who do this full time. And, I was already pretty impressed with them, but this is what they do all day long. And,
Right.
Pardon?
Yeah, so you may have those people.
We do. And, sometimes, so I'm looking, okay, where do we plug in? That public pressure is a lot of the times where we're asked to engage and get those letters written and those phone calls made, and to support. Once in a while we get to go meet with a legislator, but most of us aren't going to sit there in the hallway and catch the guy on his way to his bathroom. So,
right, and you all don't need to do that, but you need to make sure that process is happening there.
Mm-hmm.
And then, so what I would do is constantly send out updates to the representatives of all our member groups, and that they would do that work of reaching out to their members. But if the members don't really know what's going on, they won't have buy-in, they won't have a sense of agency. So there needs to be a tight linkage between these. And the other thing is, I see this all the time to this day. I see a lot of groups making feeble attempts at policy. And because they just don't really appreciate what is needed. And so doing that hard work of raising the funding for that team and also holding it accountable and following what it's doing. Those are difficult. So I want you to know that this is difficult. But the plus side is, as I said before, the team doesn't need to be that big. It's amazing what you can do, even with $50,000 or $150,000. It's amazing what you can get done because you are on the right side. And a lot of legislators, even people that are friendly with the fossil fuel industry, it's amazing how many of them actually have a conscience and will do the right thing if you can give them the political cover to do so. David.
Okay. Yeah, I guess I want to have a little understanding of New Mexico. Like, why is it in the whole held by the fossil fuel industry? I kind of know they have uranium mines, but I never heard of coal or oil in New Mexico. So
the northeast and southeast regions of New Mexico are two of the largest fossil fuel basins in the United States.
Okay.
There are hundreds of thousands of wells in those areas. New Mexico is one of the largest oil and gas exporters, and it has two oil and gas industries. It has a big leaguers. They have their own oil and gas association, and then there is the wildcatters, which have their own association.
okay.
There's also a lot of coal that comes in those basins. So we had a very powerful utility that was deeply involved with coal plants, the Four Corners power plant and the San Juan power plant, and a lot of natural gas fired power plants. And we had the uranium stuff, and that was actually tied in closely with the power utilities there because of nuclear power at Palo Verde, which they owned an interest in. So really, really difficult environment. But we did very well. I'll show you in a second. We did very, very well. But it was only through that sustained interest. And well, it's not if I'm reading the word, that sustained effort that made that work. And you guys are up against just as much difficulty where you are as we were then, because electric utilities are very difficult.
Okay, now I see. Now I understand.
Yeah. Yeah, so New Mexico is an interesting place. There's a lot of progressive thought there too. It's a barely political blue state, but it's weird, and it's fractured into different constituencies. So Native Americans, ranchers, artists and hippies, weapons labs, the national labs. It's a crazy place, and it's all balkanized. And we had to go in and work with each group. I spent a lot of time on Native American and in Native American nations, and working with the Pueblos and working with the Navajos and working with the ranchers, and it went on, and it was fascinating and wonderful, but very complex and difficult.
Can
All
I
right, so go ahead.
I just was going to ask Jerry how we're doing on time.
We can't hear you, Jared. You're muted.
Well, we did start about 7:15, and so I think maybe if we shoot from around 8:30, would that be okay?
Sounds good.
Okay.
Yeah, I'm getting through it here. Actually, it's going through.
Okay, good. Thank you.
All right. These are the major points I wanted to make. So the downsides: coalition is difficult. Different groups have different priorities. It's tough to find your way through that. Competition for funding is a big deal. Egos are a big problem sometimes. Electoral political affiliations. Some groups are C4s, things like that. That can actually get in your way. So there's a lot of difficulty. Do not enter into a coalition casually. You want to think very carefully about negotiating that and keeping the unity and purpose of it clear and free of internal strife. Some nonprofits are afraid of policy work. This is something I found. I just want to mention this. To that, I would say it's perfectly fine with the IRS if 501c3s do policy work. You just have to be a little careful with how much of your budget you devote to it. You also have to be careful not to get involved in electoral politics. And because you're not involved with electoral politics, if you're a 501c3, you have some distinct advantage over groups that are electorally oriented, which tend to have a lot more enemies in the statehouse. A nice pure 501c3 can often get along with a lot more people. All right, so here's one of my teams. This is from, I think 2006 or so, 2007, towards the end of my stay there. So there's me. So I was the director of the coalition and one of the main advocates. This is Amy Welch, one of our multi-year interns. Wonderful young lady working for the local PERG. That's how she was directly supported. Very sharp policy person. Now has a PhD in climate change stuff. This is Mara Annixter, a lobbyist, a professional lobbyist. This is another young man, Ethan, who is, if I recall his name correctly, he was another intern. There's another intern here. Name is slipping my mind right now. I think Katie, but I've forgotten. And here's another professional lobbyist here. You can tell, kind of Gregory had that lobbyist look. This is really just part of our team. I just dragged everybody outside and we were standing in the hallway one day. I said, hey, let's do a group picture. We're doing pretty well. Let's record this. We usually had a bunch of other people helping us too, but that's sort of typical. Outreach. This is Amy often functioned as our outreach coordinator during the off-season part. Here she is, one of our tables out here with one of my crazy sign contraptions, getting it right in people's face. Out on the street, showing our data, our brochures. You can see some of our member groups here, and PERG, who she was working directly for as part of the coalition. Getting out, it's a solar event, getting out what we were doing on the policy side. We were very successful. These are all the policies we got through pretty much in that long period. And to top it off, at the end, we helped defeat a major coal-fired power plant, working in coalition with a whole bunch of other groups. I'm going to go on from the tactics. I've already basically talked about those. This is the kind of stuff. This is a blurry photo of me at a podium presenting data, fighting it out one day on the statehouse steps, making speeches, trying to make our point. This is at the signing of the renewable energy standard. That's Governor Bill Richardson signing the bill. I got to give the speech to introduce the bill. There's our State Secretary of Energy. That was a happy day. This is a couple of years later when we got our solar tax credit bill through. Same guy. Bill Richardson was very publicly proactive on clean energy. But I'll just be blunt about this. He was also one of the most corrupt politicians I've ever seen. We had to work continuously behind the scenes to keep him in the right direction. And at the end of my stay in New Mexico, I actually ran an anti-corruption campaign for 8 months, in which I exposed a lot of stuff that I had learned about in the previous 6 months and helped stop a lot of things, including that coal-fired power plant. And this is the sponsor, D.D. Feldman, Senator Feldman, of our solar tax credit bill. Speaking on the bill. And that's what I typically look like at the State House. All right, so that's the talk. So I'm gonna stop the share so I can see anybody better. So comments, questions?
Dave Richardson, I'm Dave Richards.
Yeah, I was going to ask, I liked your display of solar power on a tabletop you showed in the middle of the program. And for those of us who aren't creative or technically able, is there anybody that sells such a display already designed?
You might find that. I don't know. You might find such a thing if you look around. However, what I did was I built the first one myself, and it was okay, but it was a little unelegant. But what I learned from it is that I really realized that no, really things should be in a left to right flow. I think it's a little bit convoluted. Things should be in a simple left to right flow. The wooden panel should have a handle at the top. There should be a storage place for the battery behind the wooden panel that's right below the handle. And there should be plugs for plugging things in. So I went to a local solar company called Positive Energy, and I just explained to them what I wanted. And we negotiated a price. The Solar Association funded it, and we paid them to build 10 of them. And it was not.
You suggest to them that they market them.
You know,
the Sierra groups around the country that they are available, because there's no sense in all of us reinventing the wheel multiple times.
I agree, and that's something we could talk about. I might be able to help with that idea. I like that idea, but it really wasn't hard to do. I mean, in the end, it was one conversation with them. When I laid things out, a week later on, they ran by a sketch of a design, and a month later, we had our 10 systems. So, you know, it's pretty straightforward stuff. Any company that does off-grid could do that system very easily. And today, you can get a nice little lithium-ion battery, so you get it more reliable, long-term, more zazzy, and more and lighter, like a third light. Well, 2/3 lighter. So, yeah.
Then I had a question. So as far as storage go, I'm familiar with liquid air. And then there's pumping water uphill to bring it down. And then there's iron. Is there iron flow batteries?
Yeah, so there's a whole range of battery technologies which are kind of coming out. It's hard to say, it's hard to pick winners. Lithium ion is right now way ahead, and I expect it may remain for decades to come. But we are seeing other types of flow batteries. We are seeing that liquid air type of approach. Those are industrial sort of systems. Those might come to the fore. Hydrogen has come back in a big way and is probably going to find use in industry where in cases where they need a very high level of chemical energy storage, a high energy density, and sometimes where having the hydrogen itself is good on the chemical supply side. So there's a whole range of, and there's pumped hydro storage. There's a whole range of storage options. Yeah, I wouldn't try to pick winners at this point, but we have some real stuff to work with now. There's a number of Tesla battery wall type of products out there by different companies, which can be integrated with home solar systems and larger scale. Those work. I I would probably point to those mostly right now, but we'll see. One thing I always told people, and I used to give talks to investor groups on the technology side a lot, and always tell them, don't put all your eggs in one basket, because this stuff is evolving quickly, and it's still evolving quickly.
Are you able to hear me?
Yeah,
Yes.
Oh, okay. I think, Jerry, what you're referring to is the Ludington Pump Storage Facility, jointly owned by DTE and Consumers Energy. And I think it's rated at like 1,300 or 1,400 megawatts. And it's like a giant battery. So, right, it pumps water up when electricity is cheap during the night. And then when, there's peak electricity, goes down and turns to turbines. But it does kill a lot of fish. So
That's the downside of hydro. And pumped hydro resources are very geographically sparse. There's some places that have significant pumped hydro potential. Spain is one actually that has quite an amazing amount, but a lot of parts of the world do not have good pumped hydro potential. Garrett.
Hey, Ben, I should ask this question when you're talking about education and advocacy. I know some teachers, high school teachers, that are just like really, they're just great at taking resources and introducing them to their students. Do you have like a couple of websites or places that you think are really good resources for that high school teacher who's not an expert in solar, but is really good at sort of like taking something and getting it like the next step and packaging it to introduce it to his or her students?
There is a lot of stuff out there. When you talk about that, I'm not sure what level you're talking. Are you talking about project stuff or informational, educational stuff? What sort
Kind of like engage, like I'm thinking of teachers that like we work with them and I see them with their students with a remote operated vehicle that's like, underwater checking out like a local river, like, or doing water quality testing and building over the course of time, like, so engaging in a subject matter,
What I can say is that there's a significant amount of material out there that teachers can use that's in the sort of on the internet form, the web pages and graphics and things like that, many of which are fairly good. So that stuff abounds. What's lacking, I think, is maybe on the people having engaging with physical stuff they can touch.
Yeah. Okay. Lacking. All right.
That's something I'm now that I'm getting back into the side of it, and hearing some of your questions, it's making me think I should take a hard look at what might be available out there commercially. Like that fuel cell exhibit, that was one that I believe you can still buy solar hydrogen fuel cell exhibits like that are pretty cool, that work pretty well. You can buy little solar panels easily. You can buy little motors and fans and hook them up to the solar panels very easily. If you want to do something more sophisticated, like a radio controlled car, that takes a little more work and expertise, but it's not beyond the typical science teacher.
Yeah. Okay. Thanks. Appreciate that.
Dave?
To follow up real quickly, I have another computer next to me and I looked up on the internet and found on eBay a solar energy demonstration kit and educational kit for $121.97. Just thought you'd want to know.
If you
Send
want
me
to,
the link, David.
if you want to share it real quick, I'll give you a quick 2 cents on what I think of it.
Okay, should I send this to Jerry?
You can put it right in the chat.
Well, it's on a separate computer and it's a really long address.
Oh,
Let me
yeah.
send-
Yeah,
Let me
go
send
ahead.
it to you, Jerry.
Yeah, okay, you can send it to me, good.
I have a lot of opinions on these kinds of things. So I prefer, it sounds a little crazy, but I prefer to build my own stuff and work with people that build their own stuff. If you do that, then the expertise is sort of there and control of it. And the thing is, a lot of the stuff we built was more durable than a lot of stuff you can buy. So gonna be a little careful with plastic stuff that falls off the table, it blows off the table easily. And remember, if kids are interacting with it, kids will try to break it. They play with stuff. So you want stuff that can be easily replaced, and durable, and durable is a key thing. And using off the shelf stuff that you can easily replace. Ken.
Yeah. Well, Dave, nothing's come through.
I just sent it via email.
So I do have a
Ben,
question.
I think Ben was calling out Ken. Ken, did you have a question?
Yeah, so I have a question here. I can only push the button or I can watch a video or anyway, that's not my question. My question is, first I'm gonna give a little background, was around April, about 2 years back, April, I saw on a Facebook group and I gave like $300 and I had delivered 30 utility panels, which are like 45 pounds each, 5.5 feet one way, 3.5 feet the other way, 1.5 inches thick. And I was so busy that year, I wasn't able, so I did sell them to an installer locally in Detroit. Very well background. But what I'm planning to do is get a bunch more of those, or maybe I should get some. I need to talk with somebody about, I have a little bitty trailer, what to do, how can I help? I did a little research on my own, of course. So you might have a resource out here that could help. I mean, how do we find out?
Yeah, so another thing you could do is go to the ACES website. There's a social networking thing and there's an Ask an Expert thing on the ACES website. And that may help. You may be able to contact people through there. There are a number of people in the chapters that do a lot of this kind of work. And that's another thing working in coalition. You guys might want to focus on the policy nexus more, perhaps. But you might work in coalition with a group that's doing education and that can help you coordinate with to do that kind of stuff. And then you bring the two together so that people doing the field stuff know what's going on the policy side and are there to make some phone calls and vice versa.
Okay, let me share my screen right here very quickly. I think I can. Okay, so we're going to share this one right here. And can you see this, Ben?
Yeah, so, okay, so look, okay, so there's a typical the panel on the left there, that panel on the left. Nice little solar cells, they're encased in a tough laminate. The biggest issue with that is if you stick that thing under a light, you can get it too hot and chemically destroy it. So you have to be a little careful. I'll go to the left a little bit. That little panel, yeah. You have to be a little careful with that. You have to worry about the contacts breaking off the back. But that's not a bad little panel. That panel will probably power a little motor and a fan. All right, go to the right. Okay, one thing I do and don't like about this, the labeling is good. It's a little tough to trace the flow directly and understand what that thing is doing. Storage of energy. Okay, there's some plugs here. You apparently can wire stuff together, but you can't see the connections between the meter and with the bulb and the fan. You can't see the connections. I like to see wires. I like the kids to be able to see two wires coming out of the solar panel, hooking up to the two inputs on the motor. So I like something that's a little more exposed, that kids can understand the concept of an electric circuit. The motor there, or the fan is right against the surface. What I like is a little stand that tilts the fan up on its side, like a little piece of vertical wood with the fan motor attached to the top. And so the fan is more free flowing. You can get a better flow of air through it. You can put your hand in front of it and feel the breeze better. You're not going to feel that as well with that because the airflow is shut off in the back. So those are a couple of my reactions to that. I would probably take that kit and tear it apart and rework it.
Okay.
So Ken Skolnick, were you offering to help make up stuff like this, or were you suggesting a resource that might help build stuff like this?
Yeah, I think I want to learn more about, so I'm willing to help build stuff like this. I don't know if that's a really small piece, but yeah, I had a really good source on the solar panels. If I tell you how cheap it was, you'd be I should have bought the whole warehouse. Let's put it that way.
Do you want to drop your email in the chat for us?
Yeah, how do I do that on my cell phone? Let's see.
Well, tell me your email and I'll type it into the chat right now. How about that?
Okay, great. Gee,
I'm gonna share something with you guys for a second here too.
Okay, go ahead, Ken.
so my email address for this is going to be Ken Skolnick. So Ken, K is in Kingdom, E is in Edward, N is in Nancy. Skolnick is SK. S is like
I got
sale.
it. It's on your screen.
It's on my screen. That's great. So kenskolnick.pm for project manager @gmail.com.
Cool. Thank you.
Sure enough. Yeah, I started doing something like this, and then I was overly busy at work. Now I'm underly busy, but anyway.
Cool.
Yeah, my main goal is get into project management and solar systems of some way or shape or form, and well, this is the way to do it, I guess. All right, thank you for taking that down. Yeah, if anyone wants to reach out, I'm on the track.
Very good.
So, folks, take a look right here. I wish I had a more close-up photo of this. I do somewhere, but here it is, a little piece of wood. There's a little fan up on the top. It's spinning. And it's just, you can see the wires directly connected up to the panel. The panel is tilted at an angle. This is the kind of accessibility that I like. And the kid can put his hand over the panel and stop the fan and put the other hand in front of the fan and feel the breeze.
Well, I guess we probably should be stopping at this point, Ben. Thank you very much for all that material that you've shared with us. And thank you, Jane, for that great introduction of Jane's cousin. These two are cousins.
It's my cousin. I used to babysit for him.
Oh, my goodness.
Is
Okay.
there, right before we go, is there a roster of people attending where we could get interactivity, emails, phone numbers, whatever? Or not in this forum?
You mean of everybody who's on this call?
From tonight?
Yeah, if they would be interested in, being like in another call, or it might take another month before I get another call, but some people may reach out to me and like, what do they do next? How could they be involved? And that's really my question too. So let me know how that might work.
Okay, that we will.
Right.
And people can save the chat, and that way they have your address.
Well,
email address.
they can save the chat and they'll have Ken's, but they won't have everybody else's. So
No, that's true.
I have names, I don't have emails. And a lot of these people I know and I have their names, but some I don't.
Mhm.
They may have to acknowledge that they're willing to do that, because sure, I know one installer in Detroit, very smart guy. He's a single entity, has a few people on his team, got a lot of background. And he's very pro about helping out and supporting versus others have no time. But,
So if anybody wants to be on a list like that, go ahead and drop your name into the chat right now and I'll record it.
I'll even put you my cell phone number because I'm open. I don't know if I'll get marketing out of this, but I'll just say my cell phone number is 248 area code. It is
hold on.
993.
248
All right.
993. Okay.
Yeah.
I just put a link
So
in the
993
I didn't get the whole number. 248-993.
9358.
Thank you.
It's the last four.
Okay.
Sure.
Thanks.
So Ken, stay in touch
Yeah.
with me too, and go back and forth on that.
We don't know. I don't know your email and phone number, but maybe there
Well,
we
I
go.
can get you that.
All right.
Jeannie B, have I contacted with you before? I do, it is recording. I don't know where we're gonna post that, but we did record this tonight. So if you want to give me your email address, I'll make sure you get a copy.
Okay, I will.
So I put a link in the chat, by the way, just a fun thing. I do music stuff as well. And I'm actually using that now. I'm doing benefit concerts for ACES as a way of getting people interested. And I'm actually finding it's a very effective alternative way to get people into the loop.
Okay, well, I guess that's it for this one. Hey, Ben, thank you very much. And thank you, everybody, for attending. And we'll see you next month. We have an arborist from Novi. So see you later. Good night.
And thank you.
Thank you,
Thank
Ben.
you.
A lot of good ideas.
Yeah.
Bye-bye.
Appreciate you. Take care,
Bye.
everybody.